podcast. Thanks for joining the show with me today. If you're watching on YouTube, the reason why we started doing it on YouTube here was because we have a lot of comments that people ask, and YouTube is not super friendly to commenting back and forth. So I'm doing my best to answer some of the comments we get there, as well as the ones that you guys email me. So I'm just going to start into it here, and if you guys have questions along the way, just comment below. If you're listening on the podcast, then obviously subscribe and you'll get more of the shows every week. I'm going to start doing them in my car here today. For the YouTube watchers, I'm going to try to do it around this time of day periodically just to answer some of the questions here. There's a few things to unpack here, and I will reiterate a few times again as I see people start to pop in here. We're dealing with someone with groin pain who is then having problems walking. By the way, if you are watching on YouTube, ignore the shakes. Just do the audio part. Someone having pain with walking, normally what we're looking for is something more of like an incident. Like, did this person have an incident? Did they have trauma? Did they fall, etc.? And the reason why we're looking for this is because we're trying to grade the extent of the injury. Like, is it a hip fracture? Is it a massive labral tear? Is it something of that nature? Did they tear a muscle? These are things that are considerations because they change the timeline and they also change the treatment type. For example, if you had a hip fracture, you may actually have more extended periods of rest, having a walker or deloading the bone, etc. If you had something like a labral tear, then we may also deload the tissue a little bit more so, but not to the extent of having crutches. But it would also prolong the timeline of expected results. So I wouldn't expect somebody to wake up and feel perfect the next day. I wouldn't expect someone with a hip fracture or like even a small hip fracture, like because of energy deficits, etc. I wouldn't expect them to really feel perfect the next day. Somebody had a strain? Probably. So I think unpacking first about the extent of the injury and was there any real load to create any real damage. If there wasn't, then possibly we're looking at some other type of overuse or underutilization injury, which is the most common type. By the way, if you guys are popping in, you can ask any questions that you'd like. Remember, if they're personal healthcare questions, I can't answer them directly because I'm not allowed to. But for theoretical stuff, I'm totally allowed to answer that. But we're talking about this person with hip pain walking today. Now, the second thing that we can look at in this person's scenario here is that what did they change recently? I think there's a few things here. There's the new job and there's the new workout program. Surprisingly, if you rewind in your life and think about the things that you woke up with, pain that you woke up with, etc., usually it's correlated to a new activity, and that could be a new job, new job type, where you're sitting more or walking more, etc. I always say that the people at Costco who stand there on those little like black mats, they stand there on those black mats because they're trying to decrease chance of having probably work-related injury. Everybody says, oh, sitting is the worst, standing is way better, you should stand all the time. That's not completely true either. It's more of exposure of how much you're doing that one thing when you previously weren't doing it. So this person's new job as a postman, they're walking a lot more, I would assume. Obviously they're sorting mail, they're standing at the counter at the post office, etc. So we don't know exactly what their change was. But if they're walking more, there's a chance that there was a lack of tissue preparedness. The person didn't really do that job prior and they didn't have the activity level prior, so now there's a spike of activity creating aches, pains, so on. But it doesn't mean that there's any major injury. Like I said before, we'd be looking for things like trauma, impact. There has to be a storyline that makes sense. I had a good friend I have a good friend that told a great story one time, and he was talking about, he was an attorney, he was talking about like things have to make sense in the case, and he said, so if you have someone who smashed their car into a wall and they came out unscathed, that would be a miracle. It doesn't really make any logical sense. And if you have someone who just barely like parked their car and jolted themselves and they end up like having all these like broken bones and so on, he's like, that doesn't make any sense either. And so he he demonstrated to me like kind of how things need to make sense, at least even in a clinical setting, from like um, figuring out what the person has and also calming their mind about what it potentially could be. So is it possible to break a bone if you just started walking? Probably not. Is it possible? Yeah. Is it probable? No. So generally, we kind of use the overuse or underutilization type of injuries like there was no real big trauma as there tend to be rehab cases, and these ones are usually pretty simple to rehab. They can be very painful, unfortunately, but at least pain is a really good motivator for people. They're usually more willing to comply and change their lifestyle, etc. When they're having some pain. Pain doesn't always mean that you're breaking something, that you're disabling yourself. It just means that it hurts. Sunburns hurt a lot for me, especially when going under hot water, but it doesn't mean that I'm damaging my skin either. So the other thing that we can unpack with this person's story was that they started a new activity. They started going to the gym. They're trying to lose some weight and so on. And so their exercises that they pick can matter, actually. I remember I talked to someone a while back, and he had a good story, and I think I at that point did a good job of asking some questions. But previously, when I saw him, I don't think I asked all the right questions because his problem came back. It was gone for about a year, which was a long time for him. He was having it on like every day, but he had some growing pain and so on. And so normally, as people do, when they feel better, they get back into normal activity. And so he went back to his programming at the gym, uh, and he ended up having a problem. And I said, well, what did you go back to? What was your exercise program? And he said, well, I do squats. And I said, well, how many squats, how much weight, etc. And he said, well, I do about 500 a day. And I said, 500 a day? What kind of weight you using? And he said a nominal weight. He said like 25 pounds, which wasn't very heavy for him. But he's doing a lot of volume. It's a lot. It's a big exposure spike. It's a lot. It's a less activity to more activity. But also, too, doing 500 a day of squats isn't really needed. It's a little bit in excess. And so at that time through, when I started working with him, I decided to still help him out with his pain, but also let him realize that unknowingly, and the key is unknowingly, because he didn't know he was doing this, unknowingly he's creating his own problem by having that amount of volume of that activity in. Squatting is a very common one that bothers people with hip impingement and labral tears and so on, especially the way they do it. If their knees cave in or their arches collapse, etc., then it tends to be more of a provoking factor, especially on a single side. And so this can create hip stiffness as well, which sometimes is changeable, sometimes it's not. But it was a really good realization to me that like not everybody needs, I don't say not everybody needs treatment. Some people just need guidance, and they don't always know what they're doing to create their own problem. So the reason I'm bringing this up again is because we have a few factors with this person who wrote into me. Number one is that I didn't hear anything that made me think that they have any like big major trauma, because there's no fall. If there was a fall, it's a whole different story. But also two, this person started two new activities. Which one could it be? TBD, we don't really know. But usually when we work with someone with some of our virtuals or in persons, like we get a gauge of what the person recently started doing. Like, what did you start doing about 2 to 3 months ago that was a big lifestyle change that you may, even if you don't think it's related, a lot of times something in that is part of the issue. And not that you should never work out or never walk for work, but perhaps we work into it a little bit. I have a friend who he goes and plays. We have a baseball tournament that's every year in Arizona. It's very long. I've gone a couple times and I love it, but every time I go, I get hurt. And he's realized that. He's a little older than me, and so he actually starts preparing himself about 2 months ahead of time. He does more jogging, within reason. Like he instead of jogging like once every week, he does it 3 days a week. And then finally I said, why are you doing this? And he says, every time I go to that tournament, I get hurt, and I've noticed that if I do stuff like this to build up more fitness before I go, I actually feel a lot better. I'm not sore after a lot of the games. And I told him, I said, man, I'm really sore. Like we play 2 games. By the third game, which is the next day, usually there's 2 games in a day, and then you get it's kind of on and off and so on. Um, the third day, like I don't really want to play. It's not fun. It hurts, and I feel like I'm going to hurt myself, and so I don't really mentally or physically enjoy it. So there is some good value to a build-up process, and that's what any good training program does. Whether you're playing pickleball or tennis or soccer, or it doesn't really matter. Like everything has a build-up phase, and if you do it responsibly, then your chance of injury will go down, and you'll be much happier with how your body performs. Um, I think I can't verify this or not, but I had a good friend who's usually pretty solid with his questions, or sorry, with his comments. Are usually He's usually pretty solid on it. He mentioned to me that a lot of the injuries that happen in American football actually happen in the first 4 weeks of the season. Again, I can't verify that. And he said it's mainly because of potentially having a poor buildup. Some players don't do as much in their off season. Some still do things. Um, there's other factors too. It could be different field types. Like if you play in a grass field normally, and now you're exposed to having a turf-related field. All these different things. So um, so there's a lot of variables, but I do think at least the takeaway from this story of this person is that he had 2 different things that were new to him that could potentially be related to the reason why he's having a whole new problem here. I don't know about his physical therapy or about what he was doing, because physical therapy is a very general term. It could be exercises, could be ultrasound, could be stretching, and so on. You guys want to see my dog here? I don't really show her that much. She is a fantastic dog. I'm going to look through these comments here really quickly just to see if there's anything that I can actually answer on here before I end up stopping. Remember, if you guys are looking for um, um, this, I'm doing it. I'm trying to do it every week, a couple times a week, usually around this time of day. And I'm doing my best to answer questions and emails that I get that I can't answer. I can't answer all these because I don't know you. And I don't want to give you bad advice either. So let's see. Um, there are trigger points. I see. So triggers pain only. So there's a few things on here I think that are good that we can answer. Let's talk about trigger points here. Trigger points, yeah, they can be related to this type of condition. Trigger points that I've found to be very helpful to work out are ones in what we call the tonic muscles. The tonic muscles are the ones that come online and become more active when there's an injury or there's fatigue or compensation. If you look into some of the old papers back from, God, I think it's probably the 50s or so, is there's a guy named Vladimir Yanda, and so if you look at Yanda's work, he mentions like basically postural muscles, and just a lot of his work is based upon observation. He said like people when they're fatigued they do this, people when they get hurt they do this. When people get injured, they have their hip flexor tight, and their psoas is tight, their hamstrings get tight, their abs get weak, their glutes get weak, etc. That's called lower cross syndrome. There's also upper cross syndrome, and there's a bunch of other observational work that Vladimir Yanda did. I think it's excellent, and I think that what I found over time is that people tend to have more trigger points that end up in the tonic muscles. And I think a little known, I don't want to say fact, but this is my observation from the research that I've done. And tonic muscles don't come on at one time, like for one area. Like the hip flexors won't just come on and that's the only muscle that's a problem. they come in clusters, and then people end up thinking they have multiple different strains. They feel like their hip flexors has a strain in their hamstring and their TFL, and they have all these areas that have quote unquote strains or diagnosis and so on. And it becomes kind of like it's a mad goose chase. You end up playing whack-a-mole. So my observation is the tonic muscles come on as a group. They're a system. Don't think of them as a single muscle. When the hip flexor turns on and it's overactive, it turns on the remainder of the group. And so the remainder of the group, it's a rudimentary stabilization system. They go over this in a series of rehab called DNS, dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. And when these tissues turn on, they give us a better idea that the activity, the exposure level, the weights, the reps, the sets, etc., may be a little bit too much, especially if it persists. So the way we end up using like some of our corrective exercises and the exercise programming that we give people on our virtuals is that we figure out if there's any tonic dominance associated to the exercise. For example, if this person's having groin pain and we give them a bridge to do, a glute bridge, and they feel their hamstring working, and they say, no, 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 it's okay, I can work through it. And we say, let's find a different exercise or let's coach you a different way. They say, I've been doing these for months and it's okay, I can work through it. It's just my hamstring, it cramps a little bit. And we say, do you ever feel your glute working during this? And they say, no, I mainly feel my hamstring, but it's okay, I can work through it. This is a sign of, like, again, the unknowingly creating their own issue. They're endorsing the compensation pattern. And so they're getting those tissues to work more prevalently when they're already really good at doing so. And so part of the corrective exercise strategy and also picking dosage, etc., rep sets and so on, comes down to um, what tissues are we challenging? Are we getting the target tissue that we actually want, such as the glute? It's called a glute bridge. So if you get the glute, it's phasic muscle. Phasic muscle works as a group. Then you get the ab wall and deep core, etc., the transverse abdominis, all the things that you really, really want. So I hope this was helpful to everybody. Again, if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, you get more of our shorts, and we have long format videos that come out all the time. We do 2 days a week. Just search for Performance Place Sports Care on YouTube and you'll find it. If you're listening to the podcast, again, it's called the Restoring Human Movement Podcast. And we say thanks for joining the movement. You guys will get better. Just depends on when, if you find the right provider and you find the right strategy. We'll see you guys next time. If you ever want some help, you can always reach out to us. We have virtuals 714-502-4243 or just contact us at p2sportscare.com. See you guys later.